All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Flipping Junkie podcast. I've got a good friend, John Martinez, back on the show. I know, John, you've been on one or two times, maybe even three times, but at least two times. How you doing?
I'm good. Good. How are you doing?
Good, good. Yeah, so we were talking about, everything over the last year, almost going to be a year and a half before we know it, with big changes and then people doing a lot more of the virtual or at least hybrid model of investing. And we'll get into that. We want to talk about that. But for anybody that maybe hasn't come across you, I can't imagine who hadn't heard of John Martinez at this point in the real estate investing space. But you want to go ahead and give your background in real estate investing and sales and kind of what you do?
Yeah. So I come from a sales background in corporate America, software, IT, insurance, those types of industries. And I spent about 2 decades first selling and then managing and growing sales teams. About 6 years ago now, I believe, I went out on my own to open up a sales training business because that was always my favorite part of leading sales organizations was a training piece. So anyways, I decided to go out on my own and open my own business, training salespeople. And we were training people in tons of different industries. And I actually stumbled into real estate investing completely by accident. I was doing some training with a call center, and it just turned out that this call center produced leads for real estate investors and traditional real estate agents. And so I wrote new scripts and did some basic training with their sales floor. And they called a guy named Will in Houston, great guy. And they had been calling Will an investor forever, never sold him anything. And Will said, something's changed. I love what you're doing. Sign me up, but you also have to get me in touch with whoever made these changes in your organization. So I hooked up with Will. Will Danker's his name. A lot of people know him, just one of the nicest guys on earth. And I drove down to Houston, Texas, and started working with this team, just what I would typically do with any organization, just putting a pretty structured sales process in place. And what I found out was a lot in real estate investing, a lot of the acquisitions or the sales, they hadn't really developed over the last few decades. They're still using very old kind of pushy, manipulative just outdated sales strategies. So because of that, we were able to make a lot of progress quickly. We just able to catch up his team and then others. Before I knew it, real estate investing really took over my business. So I spent the next year, when I started to see that it was going to be a huge part of what we do and eventually take over the business, I spent about a year traveling the country to really make sure I knew this industry because I had no background in it. So early on in our training days, it's now online and in boot camps and stuff, but early on, I would just hop in the car with investors or acquisition managers, and I'd go buy houses, or I'd sit there as they would, buy houses, and then I'd give them tips, and we just kind of flip flop and run appointments all day. And I did that from coast to coast for about a year. And that was the core of our sales training business. So today, REI sales training is my entire sales training business. It's all I focus on. So that's kind of the evolution from when I got started 20 some odd years ago in sales to how I ended up in REI and learning that business to what I'm doing today.
Nice. Yeah, it's really cool to hear the story from the start, because for me and you, for our relationship, it started back with Justin Williams in the mastermind group that he had, and you had presented and were a part of that group for a while, I think. And, when we took what you were teaching and implemented that into our business, things really changed. And it aligned with what we wanted, because we had always said, because it's always about kind of differentiating yourself in the competition, right? And so we would say, well, we're not the used car salespeople. We're not going to show up all flashy and all this kind of stuff. That's just not who we are. And so when you started talking about these trainings where you can, have sales, acquisitions training that doesn't necessarily have to be salesy or used car salesman like, which completely resonated, and it really did change how well we were converting leads into deals. So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to tell you about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really when I first got started. And Justin was provided me one of the first, kind of stages to get on to start spreading, the word about what we were doing. So I remember those times very fondly.
Yeah, man, good times. It's crazy how long it's already been. I'm just kind of, insane that that was what, 4 or 5 years ago already. It's just
Gotta be.
crazy stuff. So let's talk about today, like what's going on today, because a lot of people are, well, why don't I'll let you explain it. What are you coming across? Because you do work with people all over the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got 1,500 people enrolled in our program right now. So we basically, every market across the country, every, business model across the country. So I see a whole lot, and there has been some changes. When I got into this 5 or so years ago, almost everyone was just kind of doing that belly to belly acquisitions, and a lot of people still do. But because of, the events of this year and tons of other reasons, technology, people scaling quicker and all those types of things, I've seen a lot of changes in that core business model of how people actually buy houses. So it's gone from probably 99% face-to-face sales to, I think, about 50% of our customers now do everything completely virtually as far as the acquisitions go.
Wow.
And I would say probably 70 to 80% have some type of hybrid model where maybe it's not completely virtual, but there's a virtual component of some kind. So it's been kind of, it's been a big change for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's those are higher numbers than I would imagine.
Yeah, they were higher than what I imagined too. But when we do our trainings, I usually do this poll and I figure out who's doing what model, so we kind of know how to position what we do and talk about acquisitions. And I've just seen that every time we do that poll, I've seen it steadily climb. So it blew my mind too. I thought maybe 25%, maybe at the most 50, we're doing something virtual. So yeah, it's a surprise, but that's definitely the trend.
Wow. So I have a big question, but I want to first get you to commit to sharing with everybody listening the different steps and how they're different whenever you do handle things virtually rather than going belly to belly. Would you mind sharing that during this episode?
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome.
Happy to share kind of what we've seen works, and how people are kind of implementing that model.
Nice. But my question that I want to ask right now, though, is the thing that, with me, it took me a while even to hire someone to do acquisitions for me, just because it's like, wow, who would do it better? All that kind of stuff. I'm sure you've heard a lot of that. My question is, what is it like if somebody's they're switching more to virtual? Do people have a concern with, if I try to do this virtually versus my competitor showing up and being belly to belly, am I at a disadvantage?
Yeah, so I'll kind of work through that. So there's pros and cons each way. Obviously, belly to belly, there's always more of a connection. You can read the room, right? It's body language you can pick up on. The conversation is a little bit tighter. It's easier. Phone calls can sometimes be rushed. It's hard to establish a connection. Any moment of silence at all can be, it gets really awkward. And so it's a little bit more difficult on the phone to really just establish that connection. So I think inherently there's some advantages face to face, but I think where buying over the phone makes up for those advantages, and in many cases takes them over, is just speed. The investors I work with are pretty mature, I would say, pretty far. They're not new to the investing world. So they've really got lead generation figured out. They can turn it up, turn it down, get a lot of leads, as many as they want in some cases. So they can produce all the leads. So the next problem they run into is, how do I get to all of them? And that's when doing at least partially acquisitions virtually or all of it really comes into play, is that speed to the conversation. So what we see is sometimes you do have the person who's face-to-face gain an edge over the virtual investor, but sometimes they never have a chance to get out to the property because somebody's already locked it up over the phone.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that perspective of it. And while you were saying that, I'm even thinking, most of the thousands and thousands of sellers that I've worked with personally trying to buy their house, a lot of times they're not real excited to meet somebody at their house to show them something. A lot of times that they're not, they're a little bit embarrassed and ashamed about sometimes.
Yeah, you do run into the issue of how can you make an offer on my house over the phone, because, one of the biggest things we've seen that kind of kill deals, or even when you have motivated sellers and they want to make a change, sometimes things get in the way. And one of the biggest things we've seen get in the way is that kind of that nagging fear of, am I getting the best deal possible? So, one of the things that you have to learn to do is get people to understand that you're making a real offer, a good offer, and your best offer over the phone, because it's really hard sometimes for sellers to just conceptualize. You haven't seen it, you haven't been in it. How do I know I'm getting a good deal? And that can kill deals. So that is one of the challenges about going virtually and making offers over the phone.
Oh man, yeah, that's a great point to bring up, and to understand that. So let's start from the beginning of a lead coming in, and if you would share sort of the things that have changed, or the how that's handled from that first call. Somebody calls up, says, "Hey, I'd like to sell my house."
Yeah, so traditionally, a lead manager would take that call, do some basic qualifications, and set an appointment. And then an acquisition manager, or the investor, or whoever was buying the house, would show up at appointment time. Things are a little different right now for a lot of companies. One of the differences are, after that initial qualification, if you have a virtual model or a hybrid model, what I've seen lots of times at this point is it's a direct handoff to the AM, or a call scheduled as quickly as possible for the AM to hop back on the phone. I'd say the most common model I see goes like this. Lead manager takes the call. If it's a qualified seller, the lead's qualified, it's either an immediate handover to the AM, or the AM, their appointment is set for as soon as possible, minutes, hours, however quickly the AM can get to them. The AM grabs the call and really goes through their sales process over the phone. And if they feel like they get stuck, they flip it into a face-to-face appointment, but their goal is to close it over the phone. So I wanted to start big picture. That's big picture what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, have you had anybody try to, I guess like qualifying the lead, that right there, I guess if you're working with, people that are generating tons and tons and tons of leads, probably, in the hundreds per month, taking those calls for the AM and just having the AM take all the calls and be the lead intake as well, probably is going to drive them nuts, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're not built for it.
Yeah.
I mean, taking thousands of calls or hundreds of calls versus someone who's built to sell and have conversation, it's two completely different jobs. When one person who's cut out for one is usually not cut out for the other. So yeah, if you do that, I mean, and a lot of people try to do that, and you can for a short amount of time, but you brought up a really good point. If you try to make your acquisition manager, lead manager, and acquisition manager, they will get completely burnt out. And you probably won't have them very long. And if you do, they will not be effective.
Yeah, great point. And so the key is there to have somebody that's taking the calls, qualifying the lead, and then having your systems set up to where you can get that person talking to the acquisitions as soon as possible. If they can just even transfer the phone call right then and there, right?
Yeah, I mean, speed is playing more, and it's more and more relevant as far as actual conversion numbers now. I can say that 4 or 5 years ago, you can set the appointment, and then most investors, I mean, you've been around a long time, with the appointment set, we can kind of hang out, and when we get to the appointment, we can get to the appointment. If you do that today, you may never get to that appointment, right? The deal is done before you get there. So I think speed is more relevant today than it ever has been, and I think it's become more relevant at an accelerating pace because of COVID and people having to learn to do things over the phone. So I think that skill set of being able to be quick and buy over the phone if you need to is just so much more important than it's ever been. Not just to scale and to go into other markets and do that stuff, but just to survive.
Yeah, I'm starting to see why the numbers are higher than what I had imagined. It totally makes sense. If I'm making an appointment, even think I'm doing great by getting a call at 10 in the morning and saying I'll be there at 5 in the evening, and they happen to get, call another person, set up an appointment, but that person just says, hey, while we're on the phone, why don't you show me around the place?
Yeah.
Yeah,
if they're really good at
the cancellation call.
and it's closable, they'll close it right there.
Yeah.
They're not going to wait for you to go at 5.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, especially if, yeah, so let's get to that part then. How does the lead, is there anything that the lead manager is doing to frame and set up the acquisitions? Or does it just go straight to acquisitions and then it?
Yeah, so not much to frame that. Just really setting clear expectations of whatever the sales process is. So, hey, I'm going to collect some basic information, get you everything I can. If it sounds like you have an interest and that yours is a house that we may be able to buy, I'm going to set you up with the home buying specialist, and they will take it from there and try to get as accurate as possible an offer put together for your house. So just kind of outlining that from the beginning so people aren't surprised. You don't want to skip that and then get to the end of a call and say, okay, now there's going to be another call and you're not getting an offer because you'll just upset people. So not a big thing, but just setting proper expectations of, hey, here's how this typically works is definitely necessary.
Nice. Do you find that some people want to use more personal language than saying like a house buying specialist and things like that? Have you guys seen different results from people doing it different ways?
Yeah, it just depends on the size of the organization. You kind of have to use that type of language if you've got 20 AMs, or we've got a couple of companies that go nationwide that use real estate agents, and I think they've got hundreds and hundreds of real estate agents on the books who go and buy for them in different areas. So if you're a small organization, the more personal I think the better. It's just it seems that in this industry, and you can agree with it or disagree with it, well, just business in general, everyone's usually laser focused on growing or scaling and getting bigger and bigger and just doing more volume. So the more volume you do, it's kind of tough to keep that really personal feel.
Yeah, yeah, because it'll fall apart if you're saying that, but the experience that they have doesn't match it. It kind of creates a disconnect, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's perfect. All right, so what happens then with the AM? The AM now has the seller on the phone. The seller probably doesn't, have that expectation that an offer is going to be made and that they would be able to make that offer by just doing it over the phone. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so a couple of things that are important when doing all acquisitions virtually. Number one, again, is just really setting expectations, and there's a right and wrong way to do it. So that call could be 30 or 45 minutes, but if an AM hops on the phone or an investor and says, hey, I need 45 minutes of your time, you're probably not going to get it. People won't commit to that type of a chunk. So we've seen investors and AMs start doing these micro commitments. In our training, we call it setting the stage, where you just kind of outline expectations so people aren't wondering what's happening and how long things are going to take. And they do it in chunks. So an AM might get on the phone and say, hey, listen, I need about 5 minutes of your time. I want to accomplish A, B, and C. If everything's sounding good at that point, we'll talk about the next step. And they'll do that. They'll kind of requalify and kind of get into it and say, hey, my 5 minutes is up. Sounds like, we potentially have a fit here. I've got some more questions about your property and situation. It's going to take another 10 or 15 minutes. Do you have that time? So they kind of baby step their way through the appointment, because again, it's going to be hard to get people to commit to 30 to 60 minutes on the phone. And if you don't prepare them for anything, if you don't prepare them for that, you're going to get to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and they're going to start getting a little antsy. Hey, how long is this going to take? What's going on? How many freaking questions do you have? So setting those micro commitments is one of the things that have been really effective in virtual acquisitions. The other thing, in order to build more rapport and to relieve that fear of, am I getting a good offer? Is this, could I get more if someone was out here? Is the virtual tour. So really taking your time, whether you need it or not. You may be able to look at your computer and know exactly how much, what your MAO is, but taking your time to virtually walk through the house, not only to get more information if you need it, but more importantly, to build rapport and to show the seller that you're doing your due diligence and you really understand their property, is important. A lot of investors get so carried away with, I already know what the value is. I know what I can offer, so I don't need to go through all that. But they miss the point that when you do that and you go through that due diligence on the phone, it really can set a seller at ease of, they understand my house, they understand my situation. So it's a pretty accurate offer. So I think that is super important. Some people actually FaceTime and do that type of stuff. If you don't do that, you literally virtually walk through it. Hey, if I was to open up, I show up at your house, you open up the front door, what's the first thing I see? Kind of tell me about the layout of the house and how old is that? And has that been redone? And what kind of floor is it? And they get the seller to personally or to virtually walk them through the entire house. So with technology today, it's often not needed, but from a sales or a conversion perspective, it still is.
Okay, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any kind of rough numbers from what people experience with trying to get a FaceTime walkthrough or something like that?
FaceTime, I don't have any numbers, but that virtual walkthrough is no pushback there at all. Seems to be really easy.
Where they just talk it through. You don't actually.
They literally just talk through it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess you could. I guess you get to the point where you ask, like, how old is the carpet? Is it stained?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the condition? How long has that been there? And it's really a good chance just to start building some rapport too, because you're just chit chatting. It's not, really personal stuff or tough questions about their distress or financial situation. So it's such a good opportunity to build some of that rapport, since you do have a little bit of ground to make up if you're doing it over the phone and not face to face.
Yeah. For some reason, my mind jumped to if the person had a dog and talking about the carpet and saying, has Waldo peed all over that carpet? Just trying to get some of that info.
Yeah, I mean, the more detailed, the better, whatever they're willing to share. Again, I think that the two main reasons you want to do that virtual walkthrough is to build that connection and that rapport before you get deeper into the call and you get into financials and that type of stuff, and their motivation, which sometimes can be a little hairy. But then also at the very end, the thing that kills, in my opinion, the thing that kills more deals than anything else is the seller fear of, am I getting a good deal? Is there a better deal out there? That's what stops them, even if they want to, from signing a contract. That's the reason why so many investors here, well, I don't know, let me think about it. Well, I'm going to get some more quotes or offers. The only reason people get more offers is not because they want to talk to more investors. They just say, hey, what's going on in their head is, I am not sure if I'm getting a good deal. I don't feel confident that I'm not leaving money on the table. So the only way I can overcome that fear is to get 4 or 5 offers. And based on those offers, I should be able to formulate what's a good deal. So that is so important to address. If you don't remove that fear, you walk away from a lot of deals you could have had.
Okay, so are there any other strategies to help do that besides making sure that you spend the time so that they feel that exactly?
We kind of covered, the beginning of the call, but really when you get into the negotiation, what a negotiation is really designed to do is exactly that, make someone feel like they're getting the best deal possible. By the time you hit a negotiation, somebody's sold, right? Somebody wants something you have, because you can't negotiate if you don't have something that someone else wants, right? So the negotiation is built not to sell. But in my opinion, the one and only thing a negotiation is meant to do is get the other party to a point where they're confident I'm getting a good deal and not leaving a ton of money on the table. So I feel confident in moving forward now. So, and when you do that, there's a couple of real easy techniques. And I've got YouTube videos about all this stuff. So if you want, I'm going to kind of give high level here, but you can dive into any of that stuff you want to. One is price anchoring, which I know a lot of these things have been adopted the industry coast to coast. Price anchoring is just, like low comps, right? Why do we use low comps? Well, we need to reset expectations. If a seller expects 200K for their house and you come in at 100K, you're creating more of that fear of I'm leaving money on the table. So what price anchoring does, that's usually the first step in a good negotiation, is changing out whatever their expectation is of the value of the property. So it could be just something as simple as, if I wanted, a house like this in this neighborhood and kind of in the same condition, I'd usually aim for somewhere around, I'd be really comfortable at $100,000. And that doesn't have to be your offer. You just have to mention $100,000. Then you can back off and say, well, I know if I offered you something like that there's no way you jump for it. I think I could offer more. It's a great house, right? So just those little tweaks, dropping a number, starts to reset expectations, and that'll help to start to relieve that fear. A lot of people use low comps, but sometimes they create more problems than they solve. They are used. The reason they work is they work as a price anchor, but people sometimes fight that. People sometimes there aren't low comps. Sometimes they've got comps of their own. So they work sometimes, but it can also kind of put you in a hairy situation. Or they could just not believe them. But if you do something like just introduce a number and say, I'd like to buy it at this price, I know there's no way you'd accept that and I can offer more, that accomplishes the same without the drawback of getting into some type of
I like that.
back
Because,
and
yeah, I like that a lot because you're not giving them something that they can really argue. You're just saying what your experience has been and what you typically have done, which they can't really argue with. But if you tell them, hey, these are the comps and they happen to see, these other houses for sale for so much, whether they sold for that or not, they might have that belief and say, well, you're wrong and I'm right. And I need to tell you that you're wrong because you're trying to take advantage of, or whatever,
right. So
Yeah.
you get all the benefit of using something like a low comp. You reset expectations, but none of the drawback, right? None of that potential pushback. So that's usually the first step during a negotiation. One of the other biggies is, as you're negotiating, if there's kind of a back and forth and you're working through offers, kind of giving them more and more, trying to find that spot where they'll tip. A really good tip is to make sure you're always getting something in return when you increase your price or increase your offer. If you just start, tacking on 10K, 5K, 10K, then again, what's going to happen in the seller's head? I'm being taken advantage of. How do I know that I'm going to get a good deal? Now I don't trust this person. So in order to increase your price, you always have to get something in return, right? Hey, the way I structured the deal, this is my top offer. But if we can go from 30 days to close instead of 45, if we can make that happen, then I could go to, this number. Or, hey, if you could get rid of that old car in the garage, then I'd be able, it doesn't matter if it's of any value of you or not. But again, the goal of a negotiation is to relieve that fear of, am I leaving money on the table? So it's also really important to, as you negotiate and increase your offer, to make sure you're always getting something in return. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Because if you're willy-nilly going up on, then it's like, man, basically you've already come up 20 grand. So you started from the beginning trying to squeeze an extra 20 grand out of me.
You're making the fear worse, right?
Yeah.
Now that fear that might have been unfounded, am I leaving on the money on the table? Now it's a truth. Absolutely. If I do business with this person, chances are I'm getting taken advantage of.
Nice. Yeah, I like that a lot. So also the other thing is like, maybe a more of a subtle thing, but coming across with confidence and not, getting kind of wordy or explaining your offer too much. Do you have any words of advice on that, on how to try to steer away from that?
Yeah. So, jargon is a biggie, right? People in any business get to know their business, get to know it well. If there is not, and this is how it all ties together, if there's not a lot of confidence, a lot of people try to show confidence by showing people how much they know, right? By using industry jargon and over explaining how the process works and the real estate industry and how comps are done. And that's where they get their confidence is they show their expertise. But that's a horrible way to show confidence because you're usually speaking over someone's head, making them feel not very okay. And you lose a lot of rapport and trust there too. So people who don't have a great sense of, you got to be confident. If you don't have a great sense of confidence, you will over explain, and over explaining leads to less conversions.
That's a huge point. And I think even if just being aware of that could be happening, you'll notice yourself and then can make adjustments, right, to stop doing that so much and like catch yourself. Hey, I better stop because you see their eyes glaze over anyway, right?
Yeah. And you can hear people's recorded sales calls, and you can tell the people who just started, kind of the amateurs from those who've been doing it for a while, because the amateurs will go into such detail about rehabbing and the market values, and they just lean on that because they don't really have a good sales process to follow usually. So they just lean on all this knowledge, trying to overwhelm people with their expertise. And investors who've been doing it a long time, they don't do any of that. They kind of figure out the problem, all the reasons why someone would do business with them. They try to pull out anything that might get in the way. And then they present their offer in that way. Hey, you're dealing with this stuff. Here's how we'd like to put our offer together. I know you have these concerns as well, so I want to tell you how we'd address those. And then they move right into the negotiation by, dropping that price anchor. Love to pay this much. No, you'd never take it. So yeah, it is subtle, but there's a huge difference between the veterans and kind of the newer investors.
Yeah, that's big. It gives something to lots of room for improvement, I think, there for a lot of people, including myself, and for a long time. This reminds me, I just had lunch with a real good friend that I've had since high school, just before this. And he was talking, his father unfortunately just passed away recently, and he had to call funeral homes, and try to find out and set all that up. And he said the first one he called, the lady was just over friendly and just talking about all this stuff. And he's like, he was wondering whether it was even like a recording or machine. And he said it just didn't feel real. Like it was just, he was irritated and frustrated. So he got off the phone there and then called this other place. And he said the guy just, was even he was kind of unprofessional, but he was taking a drink of something, eating something, obviously on the phone, but he knew it was a real person he was talking to. But then, the guy just said, look, here's what we got. He didn't offer all these fake condolences and all this kind of stuff because he knew that wouldn't be, it would be disingenuous and handle things that way. And I think that there's a level of comfort in the confidence to where you get to that point. And it's like when you just said those things where you're not going to talk about, rehabbing and in the market values and all this kind of stuff. You instead still talked about some things, but it was all in respect to what that person was wanting.
And that's all they care about.
You said, here's some of the things that you're concerned about, and I want to address those.
Yeah.
Right. And that's basically you get, and that's what my friend wanted. I just want to know, I don't even know how to go about, asking what I need from you as a funeral home or whatever. And maybe the sellers also don't know what to ask of you. Right. And so you have to break it down for them.
How many people have sold a house for cash to an investor? That is not the way it's typically done, right? This is a world that like if someone arranging their first funeral, they've never been in this world before. And it is, it can be overwhelming. So, and that is another, what I think is another big deal killer is sometimes when people don't know what to expect, they don't pull the trigger because there's just a fear of the unknown. It's just, I'd like to sign a contract, but I have no idea what happens next. So it is a finer point. It's a line you have to walk. You have to be confident and not over explain, but you also can't just give a number and just say, this is my number, take it or leave it. Because if people don't know the next steps and kind of know what to expect, then they're going to be too scared to take a next step.
So would maybe, going in and saying, talking about the, what you're offering and then saying what the next steps will be before they can even answer, right? Yeah. Is that something that you?
Yeah. Kind of typically how this works is like this and kind of as you're explaining your offer and giving the actual offer. Because we all know that if you just picked up a phone when a lead called and said $125,000, like you wouldn't get anywhere fast, right? You would just burn through all your leads. So there's as with all things, right, there's a happy medium. You can't just drop a number and say, take it or leave it. But at the same time, you don't have to go into so much detail that you're training them to be a real estate investor themselves.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So, and then going back to the virtual side of things, when you have the AM speaking to the seller and have gotten that walkthrough, right, gotten the details of it. What's the process then of transitioning into the conversation of, making the offer and getting it under contract?
So, yeah, I mean, usually we want to find out two things, and I referenced them a little bit earlier. I think when it comes to the actual selling piece, you need to find out two things. You need to find out what their motivation is. What is their compelling reason for doing this? Why will they take action? Why will they sell you their house? You got to figure this out. So when you get to your offer, you can say, I know this is what you want to accomplish, and let me show you how I'm going to help you accomplish it. And then the other piece is, again, all the reasons why they wouldn't, because every investor gets into situations where they're dealing with extremely motivated sellers that don't sell. And then they scratch their heads going, I don't understand. This is a massive need. For example, bankruptcies, right? Or a house getting taken back. It's, hey, you're going to lose a house anyways. Why not just take some cash and save your credit? And the people don't take the deal and they can't figure out the reason why. It's not because there's a lack of motivation. It's because there's something standing in the way. There's a fear, a discomfort, risk that they're not comfortable with. There's more decision makers whose needs you haven't addressed or worked through. There could be a number of things, other options that they haven't disqualified yet. You haven't helped them do that. So the two main things in an acquisitions call over the phone you need to do is figure out why they would do business with you and why they wouldn't. And then when you get into the presentation, you're simply regurgitating those things that are important to them only. You're not overdoing it or underdoing it. Hey, these are the three things you want to accomplish. I get it. So I just want to talk about how we help you get there as quickly and easily as possible. Here's your major concerns. Those make sense, really common. Let me tell you how we typically deal with those. And then we move right into the actual offer.
Beautiful. Yeah, always about what they're looking for, right? Always about what it is that they want, and then showing that you are the person to help them get what they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. You can run into 10 sellers and they all have the same surface level motivation, call it financial distress, right? But out of those 10, you're probably going to have really 5 different motivating factors. It's what's that financial distress doing to them. One might be they're hell bent on saving their credit because they've got future plans. One might be, I don't care about my credit, but I don't get to go bowling on Fridays anymore. Like, that surface motivation can really lead to so many different compelling reasons why someone would take action. So again, if you're looking at kind of those who can't transition virtually very well versus those who can transition, you see beginners and amateurs not talk about motivation. They treat it kind of like a checkbox, like, okay, tired landlord, checkbox, but they don't go a little bit deeper into the conversation to figure out what that actually means to that person, what they're dealing with. So things tend to fall flat. So and there's other, reasons why it's important to talk about motivation. It increases an urgency to take action. It gets people in kind of what's called a decision-making state. But again, the two main pieces are going to be, why would they sell you the property? And then what a lot of people are scared to ask, why wouldn't they? But if you don't figure out why wouldn't they, then you can't deal with any of those things. You just kind of cross your fingers and hope they disappear. They won't.
Wow. And I wonder if over the phone that might be a little bit easier to get some of those answers.
It can be. I think when it comes to sales, most salespeople, most investors, most acquisition agents don't want to make people really uncomfortable. And face to face, when you're asking the really important questions, the questions that the best of the best ask, those can be uncomfortable questions. So it is sometimes easier to do over the phone, to dive into motivation a little bit, and to dive into what we call deal killers or objections or whatever you want to call them a little bit as well. I know personally when I was buying houses, I'd always get this kind of pit in my stomach when I was diving into those things. Because it's uncomfortable, but over the phone, and then we've done a lot of buying houses over text too, or kind of over text. Maybe you started on the phone, maybe there is a little bit of an appointment, and then you finish it up over text. That can be a lot easier because you kind of have a little bit of separation.
Yeah, and I was also referring to from the seller's point of view, right? When the question gets asked, and then if there's some silence there, they'll want to, because they know it's their turn to speak. I don't know.
It goes both ways. It definitely goes both ways. It's hard for people to open up. I mean, if I was to kind of summarize what makes the best of the best in this industry that way, it is because their conversations are deeper than any of their competitors. They understand more. They know more about the specific situation. And because of that, for a variety of reasons, they close more deals. There's more of a comfort factor. People feel like they understand the situation better than anyone else. There's rapport that's being built. And then there's things that come up through the depth of that conversation that they can address, right? They get into different things that they're concerned about or that they care about. And so they're able to just address them just because they found out about them. So if I was to summarize all of this into whether it's over the phone or face to face, but really important over the phone, to summarize all of this is you need a deeper conversation. So I'd say that one of the biggest sticking points transitioning to virtual acquisitions is people rush the conversation and they don't follow the sales process and go as deep as they need to.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. And that's also like, this, everything just stacks up from, developing these skills and then having your team develop these skills, because not only do you get more deals, but even, the likelihood of that person referring you and your company to somebody else and then leaving like a positive review, all of those things add up over time, big time.
Yeah, it's a snowball, right? And beyond that, even follow up with the right. Even if you don't get the deal right now, if you leave that kind of impression, if their situation changes, they're not going to be reluctant to call you, right? Because think about the opposite. The deal is not happening, but an AM or an investor tries to just push it over the goal line, just pressure. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Well, if that does turn into a sale later on, if something with that seller situation changes and they make the decision to sell, they're probably not going to call that person back because it was such an uncomfortable feeling. People don't want to jump back into it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. It just kind of stacks on each other.
Yeah, beautiful. And then getting the contract, right? You're not in person. You can't just pull it out in paper form and say, sign here.
Right.
What has been the experience, the best way to handle getting a signed contract?
Well, probably the best tip I can give is not be so eager to send the contract. So, a lot of times you get to the end and instead of people telling you, I'm going to think about it, or I'm going to get other offers, or even no, the easiest way is just to say something like, well, yes, send over the contract. I'll look at it. Or, hey, everything sounds good. And then the investor chimes in and says, hey, I'm going to send over a contract, blah, blah, blah. And they kind of rush that part. You've got to be careful not to rush it over the phone, or else you're going to end up in a situation where you're sending out contracts all over the place and they're not being returned. So over the phone, this is always important, but really important over the phone is when you get to that point where you think that the deal is close to closing, is to pull back and make sure you haven't missed anything. Even if they say, hey, what's the next step? I'd like to take a look at that paperwork. Just pausing and saying something like, hey, listen, I'm on the same page. It sounds like this might really be a good fit. But before we get to that step, I've got the feeling that you're not 100% there yet, that there's still some stuff you're going to have to figure out or think about before you're completely confident in signing a contract. Can we talk about those things for a minute? The worst thing that can happen is there's nothing and they say, no, I'm ready to sign, send me the contract. But you want to make sure that there's not any of these lingering doubts or things that need to be covered, because then it's really hard to get them back on the phone and work through those things. They got the contract, they've already talked to you. It's hard to get back in front of them and say, hey, something stalled out. Can we dig into it now? So that last step before signing the contract, pulling back and really probing to make sure they're confident, by suggesting they're not, right? Hey, I get the feeling you're not 100% there. Let's talk about all the other things you're going to have to figure out before you get to the point where you're comfortable signing. That, I think, is absolutely key.
Mm. Yeah. And it's tempting, right? You feel like you already got it locked up. You feel like, and that's just our assumption. And then you want to say, let's do this.
The truth of the matter is many of those contracts just don't come back.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why.
Yeah. Wow. Great. And so from that point, I mean, it's basically like any other sale. I mean, is there, people doing the virtual, do they set a thing with a clause to go and actually view the property before closing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them do. Just a basic, contingency or whatever you want to call it on the contract. And some will go and some will send an inspector or somebody else. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you still need to get eyeballs on it, that's not too difficult to do. Also, really, a lot of them use that in the negotiation. They know that typically when they give their first offer, that's not going to be the one that's accepted. So that is a really good tool to kind of get the seller to volunteer that access is, hey, listen, if we could do this, there's still some unknowns. If I could send my builder in there for just 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, sometimes before close, just to get eyeballs on there, I'd be able to increase my offer to this. That way you've actually got the seller volunteering to give access, and you can use it with, with your negotiation.
Yeah, that's nice. There's been so many great tips in this. I mean, even just from this episode, I think people, if they took what you said and actually implement it in a way that is natural for them to move into, could even double their conversion rate for some people, I would think.
Yeah, it's the increasing conversion rates. There's no one big thing. There's no one magic pill where if you just do this, if you just have this close, if you just have this type of offer, that drastically increases conversion rates. It's usually a collection of very little things like we talked about.
Yeah. And yeah, just committing to that change, right? Because it's probably awkward for some people at first to do these things, and it's easy to fall back into the old way of doing things, but you just commit to it. And honestly, this talk has made it sound really kind of exciting and fun to where I want to try to do this, right? I want to try to close it over the phone, even if I can set the appointment and go see the place.
Yeah, there's no harm in trying, because you could always just, change halfway through and go see the place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this has been great, man. I really appreciate all these, experience found tips. This is all from experience with working with so many people for a while now. So really appreciate you sharing all of it. And yeah, I mean, just go deep on all this different stuff that really works. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. So if anybody listening wants to get a hold of you, John, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
REIsalesacademy.com or midwestrev.com. Both go to the same place. Our website, it has contact information, tons of free trainings and things like that. So we try to keep all of our resources on that site, links to our YouTube channel, that type of stuff, so people can get whatever they want from that website.
Wonderful. Yeah, everybody go check that out. He's got a ton of stuff there to offer, and definitely worth it. I recently was even in there going through a lot of material. I can't believe how much you have that you share freely on all those resources. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. It was good talking to you again and seeing you.
You too, Danny.
All right. Take care.